Narcissism is not really what people think it is. It is not a sense of ego and just a self-preoccupation. It has those qualities, but underneath it is a deep sense of shame, feeling small, injured, empty. And what people do to manage that is they put a pseudo-self on top of that tends to be kind of inflated and big so they can get from the environment what they need to feel okay and to compensate from that inner emptiness and inner smallness. True narcissists are a pain in the ass. They're difficult to deal with. I remember my own therapist told me, she said, I spend most of my time dealing with people who are in relationships with narcissists. The narcissists don't come to therapy because they're fine. The world's the problem. Out there's the problem. You guys need to change. I'm fine. And they can do a lot of destruction that way. So narcissistic traits have become exceedingly common. I was working in a psychiatric hospital in the early 1980s, and I saw this turn come on. We have these admitting sheets. Back in those days, it would always include a personality disorder and a primary psych diagnosis. And the personality disorders, when I first arrived there in the mid-80s, included all kinds of different kinds of personality. And I noticed by the end of the 80s, it was shifting towards borderline. And by the 90s, it was exclusively what we call cluster B personality disorders, exclusively, which are the narcissistic disorders. So I thought, this is interesting. And what I saw was this turn, and of course I had a radio show at the time, and I was talking to people who had all this childhood trauma, and they were manifesting narcissistic traits and traumatic reenactments of all types. And the narcissistic turn came. It's happened. There's no doubt about it. There's been more narcissistic traits. I then published some literature on this, wrote a book about it, and it's clear. It has happened. What does that mean? Well, narcissism, of course, has adaptive qualities to it as well. But the liability of narcissism is empathic failure and envy. Those are the two destructive qualities that narcissists manifest. So they, in most states, don't appreciate that really your mind has content or that your feelings matter. And their feelings don't matter either, for that matter. And when somebody tells you feelings don't matter, watch out. So empathic failure, your feelings don't really matter or can't really appreciate them even. But envy is the more destructive emotion. I mean, you look at almost every religious scripture, no matter the religion, you will find injunctions against envy. It is one of the most destructive of human emotions. It's when it's not jealousy, which is, hey, you have something I have and it makes me uncomfortable. Jealousy can be, hey, you have something I have, I don't have, I'm going to work hard to be like you. I'm jealous. That makes me uncomfortable, but I'm going to get what you got. Envy is, you have something I don't have, makes me angry, and I'm going to destroy you. That's what envy is about. Envy is a destructive, awful emotion. And narcissism and narcissistic traits and narcissists are prone to envy. So I've been very interested in periods of history where there's been a lot of childhood trauma, which is sort of the inciting influence of narcissism. Childhood trauma kind of causes the narcissism. We call it narcissistic injury of childhood, where the child is violated in some way and has to kind of manage that trauma, and narcissism is one of those strategies. So I became interested in looking at periods of history where there'd been a lot of childhood trauma. And lo and behold, what you see is narcissistic sorts of features emerging on the heels of that. And then you also find mobs. You find people gathering together and focusing their envy on one or somebody or some group. Mob action, scapegoating. That's another major liability of narcissism. Guillotines, cultural revolutions. It's always about we are gathering together as a mob and we're taking action on you, on a small group or one person. The mathematical consequences and reality of that is eventually you go on the guillotine too. That's one of the mathematical features, mathematical certainties of bringing out the guillotines, is you go on the guillotine eventually too if you bring the guillotines out. That's what people don't appreciate, that the aggression becomes distributed and unregulated, and revenge and envy just continue to boil. It's an awful thing, and we have to push back on it fast before it really takes hold. We have our version now. It's cancel culture. When I wrote my book on narcissism, I wanted to write a chapter about pre-revolutionary France because it was so perfect for what we were going through. I wanted to predict guillotines. I didn't know anything about social media or cancellation; didn't exist yet. But cancellation is our modern version of the guillotine. It doesn't mean, though, that we won't go to actual overt violence if we're not careful. Look at what's going on with some of these demonstrations and the anti-Semitism and the acting out on one group, one person. There it is. It's happening.
Are narcissists bad people?
Well, I want to reframe that because people with narcissistic traits can do terrible things, much like drug addicts and alcoholics can do terrible things. I actually have empathy for them. I know what's underneath that, which is underneath it is a deep sense of shame and not feeling good about yourself and emptiness. So I'm sympathetic to that. It doesn't excuse the behavior. And so you have sort of two choices in dealing with people like that, which is get away. That's a legitimate and reasonable way to go. The other is to try to be empathic and sort of understanding towards what these things are and how they manifest. Now, obviously, if it's a disorder, get away because they're not going to change. But if it's somebody with mild traits, I have a certain amount of faith that they can get better if they want to. The problem is they have to understand what's going on. And, it requires doing something about the trauma. And so I feel bad that we have all this trauma and that so many people are, whether it's intergenerational trauma or there's so much trauma being carried around right now. I want people to heal that. And so I want to give them a chance. But doesn't mean you shouldn't stick it out necessarily. If they start doing awful things and aren't willing to change, you got to go.
How do you know if you're in a relationship with a narcissist?
It's very hard to tell. As that one comment mentioned, it can be very covert. And it can almost look like caretaking. I'll tell you, where I see it out of control right now is this grandiose caretaking. I care so much. That's narcissism, everybody. I was in a room the other day where a drug addict was telling a story about when he was using. He was relatively newly sober, and he used some language that we sort of don't use anymore. It's not respectful of LGBTQ. And this kid behind me started screaming at him, and I thought, hey man, if you really cared about the language that guy was using, you would go up to him afterwards and go, hey man, I understand you were using during those days. The language has evolved a little bit. It doesn't strike right. Please don't use that word anymore. No, it's, I care, and you need to know it. That's disgusting, in my opinion. That is the opposite of actually caring.
What do you do if your kids are narcissists?
Well, a lot of kids are narcissists. Again, I feel bad for them. It's not going to go well for them. It is. I would guess the simple answer to that is see if reality doesn't break through a little bit. Don't rescue them. Don't support necessarily some of their stuff. They may ask you to sort of side in an us-them world that they're seeing, and I would urge you not to do that and to let reality come to bear a bit. One of the great mistakes that parents make these days is rescuing kids. You rescue somebody, you make them dependent on the rescuing. They never develop what they need to do to be able to manage whatever it is that comes to bear. A friend of mine wrote a book called The Gift of Failure, and I thought, yeah, failure is a gift. You got to let kids fail. You got to let them fall. Do not rescue.
Are narcissists born or are they created?
Well, there's argument about how much of narcissism and narcissistic trait is genetic. Everything in humans has some genetic component to it. As a rule of thumb, about 60% of disorders have a genetic contribution, a significant genetic contribution. Like for the way we say it, say in alcoholism, 60% of alcoholism is accounted for on the basis of genetics alone. So genetics play a role. But these major shifts and turns in the sort of predominant personality style, that's the environment. That's the environment coming in. The ones that get severe narcissism, well, then you got to wonder if there's a genetic component there as well.
Are all politicians narcissists?
Well, we did our study on narcissism and celebrity, and our plan was to next go after politicians because we figured it would be worse amongst politicians. And you have to have a certain amount of narcissism is healthy, right? There's such a thing as healthy narcissism. The problem is if you start not caring about other people and their feelings, that's when it's unhealthy narcissism, and when you have a lot of shame and envy and all that nonsense. When you look around the political landscape, you're hard-pressed to find people that don't have these traits.
How do I know if I am a narcissist?
If you had narcissistic disorder, you would not know. You would think that everyone around you was unfair and an asshole. You think a lot of things about other people. But if you have traits like most of us do, you will find yourself feeling emptiness. You will find yourself what they call longing for the end of longing, like non-specific longing for things because you're not connecting with people quite properly. You may have mood disturbances, you may have anxiety, and you may find your relationships, for reasons you can't explain, aren't running as smoothly as you would like them to. And it's a great time for therapy. Therapy can really help this stuff. I mean, it's hard to do it without therapy, frankly. People do it. People do get better. I'm going to give you one piece of advice. The simplest piece of advice and the most comprehensive piece of advice I can give someone, and it applies more than just to the narcissist, but it certainly does apply to the narcissist. Live by the golden rule. Let the golden rule be your guide at all times. No exception. No exception. And make it a habit. Make it a way of life. And then on top of that, I would argue, live that golden rule as though a camera is rolling on you at all times, which these days it practically is. So assume a camera is always on you and that people can see whether or not you're actually living up to that rule. It's very simple. That golden rule was put in place for a reason. The injunctions against envy are for a reason, because we have these liabilities, and scriptures throughout time have known that and have been concerned about it, and well, they should have been.
Is narcissism genetic?
Well, there's no doubt, from my perspective, that these personality traits shift and change throughout history. You know, there's the fourth turning and theories like that, and certainly personality styles come along with that. Look, in the 1850s, they debated whether or not narcissistic personality disorder existed, whether it was a real thing. That's how unusual it was back in the mid-19th century. So yes, things do change, do shift. Why do they shift and how do they get better is the more challenging question. And of course, most of it boils down to childhood experiences and what the environment of living is for children. Is there sufficient safety? Do they feel attuned? Is there proper caretaking? Do they get traumatized? Do they feel loved and secure? Are they given proper values and habits? It's all so simple. Grandma knew it.
What happens to society when narcissism spreads?
Just think about what happens when you really don't care about anybody else except yourself. Just think about how much harm another human could do, right? I mean, there's sort of no end to it. You can any variation on the theme. People get away with it. You don't have to be criminal, but it still hurts people. You harm people. Narcissists harm people. There's no doubt about it. The primary manifestation you're going to notice is dysregulated aggression, hostility, what's called narcissistic rage. You're going to see a lot of, and if you have envy, it's going to come your way. And if you have empathic failure, you're going to act it out on people without caring about it. That's where it becomes very, very destructive. Now, what you're noticing is it has a way of sublimating in mob action. Mobs are the big liability of narcissism and childhood trauma. And so we have lots of mob action right now. And mobs are unpredictable. Mobs are violent. Mobs are rapacious. Mobs are not the behavior of a single individual. Its fundamental function is focusing rage and aggression so you don't act it out on each other, the gratification and arousal of being in a mob, and then scapegoating. Scapegoating is so destructive.
But these college protesters just say they care.
This grandiose caring is an expression of narcissism. Now, it's interesting because it's a wolf in sheep's clothes, right? It's good that they're caring about the oppressed. That is a worthy thing. But then go help the oppressed. Don't beat your chest about it. You're just in a mob now. You're not helping. You really aren't helping. You're just expressing your own narcissistic impulses. There's a million other ways you can actually be of help. And the way humans really are helped, and by the way, the most satisfying and non-narcissistic way of helping is having something of worth that you have to offer another person one-on-one. That is the real exchange of nourishment, of caretaking and service. It's good to go out and care about lots of people. It's good to serve food in a homeless kitchen. That's all good. But it's not the fundamental source of nourishment of service, which is one person helping another person who needs help. That's how you do it. I don't want to get religious here, but I mean, look at the New Testament. It's about one guy helping one person. Now, saying things that enlighten a lot of people, but it's really about him. Mary Magdalene was one person. Service, one person. Right now, these phenomenon, these things like the golden rule that you find in the religious scriptures needs a new PR, needs a new public relation approach, because people go, oh, that's religious stuff. No, it isn't. It happens to be in the religious scriptures, but no, it's a fundamental way of living healthy, particularly during times like this where there's a narcissistic turn.
Times like this are hard to wrap your head around.
I don't find this hard to wrap my head around. I find it hard to know where it's going. That's the scary part to me. I understand what's going on. I get it. I feel bad for some of the people who are even doing some of the destructive things, but I worry about where it's going. And so to me, the best I can do is to raise awareness and to push back hard. We have to contain this before people are hurt. The oddest thing of all for me is the fact that it seems to be at least almost a worldwide phenomenon. It's certainly a Western phenomenon, that's for sure. And how everybody got here all at once, that part I do have trouble getting my head around. But if you look at history, look at the mid-19th century, there was tremendous numbers of different kinds of uprising. They sort of went under the heading of strikes that ended in some revolutionary activity, Russia, China. So it does seem to, when it comes, sweep across the world.
Could America see an increase in violence?
I hope that's untrue. I hope, because it could be. Look, there's a lot of unregulated aggression, and then people feel aggressive to respond to that, and things can escalate. It can. I would say, let's use our words. Let's use all this great communication materials we have now. Read your history. Listen to people that have something to say, and try to understand what's going on right now. And don't get swept into mobs. Being a part of a mob is never makes things better.
If you like this clip, we've got so much more where that came from. So be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss our new videos as they come out each week.